Violent crime victims continue to wait months for money to help rebuild their lives. This as lawmakers just passed legislation to expand the program, funded by court costs, federal grants, and fees when someone's convicted of a crime. But more than 6 months after KXAN investigator Matt Grant first uncovered record delays, he's now finding the problems even worse.
Because when survivors speak,
after enduring tragedy and heartache, survivors of violent crimes came to the Capitol this session in a show of unity and a cry for help.
Call for our elected leaders to stand with us and ensure that survivors have the help they need to heal.
Austin resident Jill Henderson's 22-year-old son, Bakari, on a trip to Greece in 2017, was beaten to death.
Ready?
Okay. She isn't surprised the KXAN investigation found victims of violent crimes and their families are waiting a long time for money the state promised.
It's something I've not only heard about, I'm living through it.
She says it took 8 months to be reimbursed for travel to attend the overseas trial, describing an antiquated process of documents needing to be faxed or mailed.
Once you send everything in, there's no communication back to you whether or not anything's been received.
Is the state of Texas doing enough for crime survivors now?
Truthfully, no.
As of March, new data shows it took an average of 180 days for victims to receive their first payment, up from 121 days a year earlier. Attorney General Ken Paxton's office manages Texas's Crime Victims Compensation Fund. It views 250 days as too long to wait, but 122 victims were waiting at least that long in March, up from 33 a year before. In his end-of-year report, Paxton acknowledged problems with the program, writing, "Unfortunately, in many ways, COVID-19 and related economic challenges continue to affect different facets of victim services, including training, staffing, teleworking, and our ability to respond to mass casualty events." This month, the legislature passed a Senate bill expanding eligibility to household members and increasing caps on relocation expenses, rent, and lost wages due to bereavement. It now goes to the governor.
I'm really committed to making sure that crime victims get the compensation that they need.
Democratic State Representative Mary Gonzalez authored a companion bill and is now putting pressure on the AG to do more for those struggling to rebuild their lives.
We want to make sure that the state is taking care of them. This is the fund that would take care of those families.
The governor and AG's office did not respond to our requests for comment. Last year, Paxton wrote he was looking at areas that could be improved to better serve victims. Next year's budget includes across-the-board pay raises addressing high turnover, one of the reasons cited for long payment delays. Matt Grant, KXAN investigates.
The companion legislation, Senate Bill 49, was taken up instead of Representative Gonzalez's bill, which she set aside. Catch up on our complete coverage. We have a link to our original held up report in this story in the investigative section of KXAN.com.
A year after KXAN exposed high turnover at the Texas Attorney General's office, slowing the release of millions of dollars owed to victims of violent crimes, and 2 months after a new law went into effect expanding eligibility, spurred from our reporting, tonight we have discovered problems still persist.
KXAN investigator Matt Grant has more on how victims and advocates say the state's staffing woes are causing survivors to suffer again.
These days, Stephen Heller is riding high. Lucky, he says, to be alive.
So this is your first time being back in this spot? Yeah, it's my first time back.
It was at this Austin intersection where Heller was struck last New Year's Day.
Luckily, everything ended up being okay, which is amazing.
According to the police report, the driver was a convicted felon fleeing in a stolen car.
I remember feeling the car going up into the air, seeing my bike flying away from me the other direction that I was going, and then just hitting the ground very hard.
Heller suffered minor injuries, but was hit with around $3,000 in hospital bills. Texas's Crime Victims Compensation Fund agreed to pay for certain crime-related costs.
That was the first time I ever heard of that specific fund. And I thought that was a really cool feature of our state.
The fund, operated by the Attorney General's office, collects money in part from convicted criminals to help survivors of violent crimes. The program has awarded more than $70 million in previous years. Heller applied in March and was approved in June. But nearly 6 months later, and almost a year after his accident, he's yet to receive any money.
It's getting to where my bills are final past due at this point. I've been having to make little payments myself on them just to avoid going to collections.
In that time, records show the person who hit him was arrested, jailed, pleaded guilty, and was sent to state prison to begin a 2-year sentence.
It's pretty amazing that our judicial system is acting faster than what seems like a simple fund payout.
It's an absolute lifeline.
Some victim rights advocates tell KXAN they're also seeing survivors waiting longer for assistance the state promised, needed to rebuild their lives. Donna Bloom is Director of Legal Services for a Domestic Violence and Rape Crisis Center near Dallas.
It's been really difficult. It has slowed tremendously over the last several years. And we are contending with wait times of up to 4, 5, 6 months in order to get eligibility decisions for our clients.
Internal data we obtained reveals in July 2021, victims were waiting an average greater than 100 days for their first payment. That average had nearly doubled by this past July, a month after Heller was approved.
When I called my case manager, every time it went to voicemail, and every time I left a voice message, I never got a call back.
His frustrations documented in emails to police, with one advocate telling him in August, "Unfortunately, crime victims' compensation is way behind on processing claims due to staff shortage, and I honestly cannot give you a time frame for when you can expect payment."
How do you feel that almost a year later, you still haven't received a dime?
I feel pretty upset and annoyed because I've been contacting the police department and their offices like basically nonstop several times per month and sometimes per week with little change or information about why things aren't happening.
We asked the Attorney General's office about increasing wait times for Heller and other crime victims. We have not heard back, and tomorrow we'll tell you more about our efforts to get answers from the office. What we do know, in last year's annual report, Attorney General Ken Paxton blamed staffing issues on, quote, COVID-19 and related economic challenges. Also tomorrow night, a former top official at this division inside the AG's office is speaking out for the first time about what she's seen as the reasons behind the wait. Matt Grant, KXAN Investigates.
And our thanks to Matt for that. In September, a new law went into effect expanding eligibility to household members of victims, increasing the amount of relocation compensation, and lifting the cap on lost wages and bereavement leave for family members of murder victims. Now, at the time, the agency told us it was nearly fully staffed, thanks in part to across-the-board pay raises for all state employees.
It's getting to where my bills are final past due at this point. I've been having to make little payments myself on them just to avoid going to collections.
This week we told you crime victims are waiting longer for money from the state. These victims in some cases need this money to escape abuse or rebuild their lives. Tonight, a former attorney at the Texas Attorney General's office is speaking out.
And she tells KXAN investigator Matt Grant the state's Crime Victims Compensation Division has submitted misleading information to lawmakers for years.
For more than a decade, employment records show Kristen Huff, right here, worked at the Attorney General's office. Most recently, according to this resignation letter, as Assistant Attorney General and Deputy Chief of the Crime Victim Services Division. She says in charge of appeals and litigation. She resigned in early April during the legislative session. Her letter doesn't say why, but she tells us it was due to, quote, extreme burnout. And tonight, she says the agency has been reporting a picture of success to lawmakers that doesn't reflect reality.
We're going to call Kristen Huff with the Office of the Attorney General's.
Hi, I'm Kristen Huff. I am an attorney with Crime Victims Compensation.
In October 2022, Huff testified to state lawmakers about Texas's Crime Victims Compensation Fund. She said the agency could handle paying additional claims if the state expanded eligibility.
Do we have the resources to meet those needs if we increase them?
Yes, we think so.
That proposal became law, praised by victim rights advocates.
I was not able to speak freely.
But Huff now says she wishes she said more about problems plaguing her former division.
I would have told them more candidly that the program was in desperate crisis and that they needed to address the root of the problem. I would have said, we need to focus on getting the work done and getting the employee and employment pool stable. I would have told them it wasn't the right time to maybe expand into other areas.
Huff says she had to leave her dream job due to stress brought on by mass violence cases and high turnover in the division, which KXAN first uncovered a year ago.
The turnover had become so contagious that it was impacting everyone.
Did you know it was as bad as it was until
No.
we started asking these questions?
No.
She's speaking out now because she wants to clear the air, even though she says it could risk future government employment.
For lawyers to speak out against a former employer, especially if that one is an elected official, is pretty much career suicide.
There we go.
As a result of high turnover, survivors of crimes like Stephen Heller are waiting longer for help the state promised. On New Year's Day, Heller was hit by a convicted felon fleeing police in a stolen car.
I remember feeling the car going up into the air, seeing my bike flying away from me the other direction that I was going, and then just hitting the ground very hard.
Nearly 6 months after the fund said it would cover his hospital bills, Heller was still waiting.
I feel pretty upset and annoyed.
He's not alone. Data shows average wait times for assistance were around 200 days in July. At the same time, the Crime Victims Compensation Division is submitting required reports like these to the state legislature. The office set less than 46 days for a first payment as its benchmark. Since 2019, it's told lawmakers it was exceeding its own goal nearly every quarter, reporting this year an average around a month.
I'd be surprised because that's definitely not the experience I've been having.
This false idea that victims are actually getting that payment in that much time. That is not true. Victims are getting payments much longer than the average days to payment.
Huff says the state is meeting its 46-day or less goal by averaging 2 very different types of claims. That's backed up by internal records we obtained. The data shows the office is averaging victim claims with reimbursements for rape kit exams paid directly to hospitals. Those claims don't involve survivors and are often paid quickly in about a week. Huff says including those fast payments to hospitals with its slower response time for claims submitted by crime victims are skewing the state's numbers.
So it's not a fair comparison. It's apples and oranges. But when they report the number for how long it takes to pay, those apples and oranges are like, it's just fruit. To this day, most people do not understand why those numbers are combined. It's just never been separated out.
Over 2 weeks, we left voicemails and sent a half dozen emails to the Attorney General's office outlining Huff's concerns and the points of our investigation seeking comment. After receiving no response, we headed to the AG's office building during regular business hours. We waited for someone to take us through security and let us up to the AG's floor. No one ever showed, so we dropped our questions off at the front desk and left a voicemail.
For a quicker response, email communications@oag.texas.gov.
Again.
We haven't heard back, so we're here in person to try to keep getting answers on behalf of victims.
Well, that was more than a week ago. We'll update our story online if we hear back. We also reached out to the 10 largest states to see how their attorneys general report crime victims' compensation performance, and we'll update you as we receive those results. Meanwhile, our investigation found Texas's Crime Victims Fund is paying out less lately. Records show it failed to meet its 2023 fiscal year goal by around $20 million. Huff called that a measurable failure. Regarding high turnover, in September, Paxton's office told us, quote, recruiting and retention difficulties that state agencies have faced in recent years was helped by an across-the-board pay raise for all state employees. The agency said the Crime Victim Services Division is, quote, nearly fully staffed, and it works tirelessly to provide attentive, high-quality service. Matt Grant, KXAN Investigates.